Hi, Brian. Welcome. It's very nice to meet you. And thank you for joining me in my podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing good, Joseph. Thank you for having me on your channel.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks again for being here. Before we jump in, Brian, can you tell me a bit about yourself, how you discovered carnivore? How did it all start for you?
Yeah. All right. So I am 52 years old, and I've been overweight for most of my adult life. When I was in high school, I played basketball, and I was pretty thin. Um, and after games, like the next day at practice, we would watch our film of the previous game, and I actually looked like a toothpick out there. I was so thin. So I was pretty thin back then. But then after high school, graduated, started dating, got married, and had kids. And over that, 5 or 6 year period or so, I put on a lot of weight. And I've pretty much been overweight ever since then. Um, I did have a time period in 2018 that I kind of got to the point that I was fed up and I said, I got to do something with my body, with my life. Things just weren't going well. And I started doing a diet where I kind of restricted how much I was eating. It restricted like carbohydrates and stuff like that as well. And I lost quite a bit of weight. Lost actually over 100 pounds, and I got pretty thin from doing it, but it wasn't very sustainable because not only was it low carb, but it was also kind of low fat. So it just wasn't a very sustainable thing that I was doing. And I also worked out a lot when I was doing that. And, you know, despite the fact that had lost quite a bit of weight, I was always sore from working out and in a lot of pain and stuff like that. And then I ended up in 2018, as I started to gain some of the weight back, I developed something called AFib. And that's a heart condition where your signals going to your heart to tell it to beat get mixed up and it starts racing really high and stuff like that. So I developed that in 2018. And then by probably the end of 2018, I gained all the weight back plus some. And that would kind of fast forward me to when I started to finally find Carnivore. This would have been in 2022. In the spring of 2022, I actually first kind of got to that point where I was just like, something has to be done again, right? Kind of how I was in 2017. Just felt like I wasn't necessarily going to live very much longer if I didn't do something to get healthier. And I knew people had been doing keto, and with keto, they were seeing success. So I started doing keto in the spring, and I did lose a little bit of weight, but I didn't notice any kind of differences in terms that I was always in pain. I couldn't sleep at night. I'd sleep for a few hours in bed and then I have to get up. I couldn't sleep in bed any longer because I was so sore with my back and my hip and stuff like that. And just a lot of pain, feeling tired, not really having the motivation to do anything, having a little bit of mild depression, that kind of stuff. And that just didn't seem like it was getting better, but I did lose a little bit of weight. I don't know, it's like maybe I think 15 pounds or so, 15 to 20 pounds. But in that time, I did it for about 3 months. I was researching more and more like Dr. Camberry and so forth and hearing more about carnivore. And I said to myself that I really think carnivore is the way to go. So in July of 2022, which was just a little over 4 years ago, I started the carnivore diet. And it was just a game changer for me. I actually lost 65 pounds in the first 3 months on the carnivore diet. Within the first couple of weeks, I was sleeping in bed all night, no more back pain, no more hip pain. And I noticed pretty quickly, like first few weeks, that my AFib episodes had gone away. Now, I should say, before I had started Carnivore, the AFib from 2018 had gotten worse and worse all as time went on, right? And I was at the point before I started Carnivore that I was having an episode where I would go into this, really bad heart rate and so forth, and then it would kind of go away on its own. But I'd have those episodes at least 2 to 3 a week, at least. And I noticed pretty quickly within a few weeks on Carnivore that I was not having those episodes anymore. So you might have other questions for me. I'll just make it long story short. I have not had an episode of AFib now in 4 years. My cardiologist had me on medication for it, a blood thinner and so forth. I've been taking off all those medications a couple of years ago after being like 2 years without it. Done a lot of different things with a heart monitor for tests, stress tests, CAC score, all those types of things. And there's been no sign or evidence of any AFib episodes since then. So that's probably the biggest thing that's been great for me. Altogether, I've lost, I like to say 85 pounds, but it's probably actually closer to 90, 95 pounds now on the carnivore diet in the 4 years since I've been carnivore.
Wow, that's really awesome. 4 years now, and not a single episode. That's great to hear. I guess I just want to explore a little bit about the AFib. I did hear that from another carnivore I spoke to, but I'm not very familiar. What are the common symptoms like with AFib? I know you mentioned it was like a heart rhythm disorder. Like, what are the common symptoms for that?
Okay, so let me tell you exactly what happens first, and then I'll tell you the symptoms. So what happens is the electrical signals that go to your heart to tell it to beat get mixed up, and it makes your heart start beating like in a non-rhythm form. So normally, you're beating and it's just this normal rhythm. There's no skipped beats or anything, it's pretty normal, right? When this happens, the signals get mixed up. So first of all, your heart tends to race and it's beating fastly, but it will go up and down all over the place. So if you're checking your heart rate at the time, you will see it can really jump anywhere like 140, 160, 180, something like that, really high. And then it might go down some. So like I would see maybe a 140 heart rate and it would go down to like 100 or 99 or 95, something like that. And then all of a sudden it would jump back up, be like 125, then it'd be like 150, something like that, right? And it might actually be at the 140, 150 mark or something like that for as much as like 20 seconds. And then all of a sudden it drops down a little bit for 5 seconds or so. And then it drops, or then it rises way back up again and so forth. So that's kind of what happens. In terms of the symptoms, there can be different symptoms. And I guess, at least for me, what I found is that as it went on and I had it more often, I got better at noticing the symptoms. Like the first time it happened, I didn't notice anything really. I had worked out at the office that day. And when I got home, I just checked my blood pressure. I was getting ready to go somewhere and I checked my blood pressure and it came up with an irregular heartbeat. And I thought that was kind of weird because that usually doesn't happen when I check my blood pressure. And I think the heart rate might have been like, I don't know, 120 or something like that. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. So I checked it a few times and it kept coming up. So I talked to my wife and we were like, yeah, we should probably go to the ER and see what's going on. And that's when they hooked me up to stuff. And they were like, yeah, you are in atrial fibrillation, which is what AFib stands for. So as time went on, I got better at noticing symptoms. One of the symptoms that you can notice is that your heart just feels like it's racing, beating really, really fast. Another thing for me that I have gotten good at noticing is that My face especially gets really hot. Um, I get really tired. That's another one. Like I could be sitting there, and typically when I would go into AFib, I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there and it would just happen, right? So I'd be sitting there and all of a sudden I'd be like, man, I seem really tired this evening. I don't know why that's happening. And then I'd go and check it. And sure enough, I was in irregular heartbeat. And then I eventually got this Fitbit, which would track my heart rate so I could see it then. And you can really tell with a Fitbit, like you can just monitor it and you'll see the heart rate will be at like 120, then 145. Then a couple seconds later, it's at like 110. And then a couple seconds later, it's at like 150 or something, right? So you can really see it on your Fitbit if you have one. And so those, I would say, are the main symptoms that I have noticed. There are people that will say that they feel pain with it as well, but I never noticed pain or anything when I had it. But I guess I should say to clarify, I'm sorry, I should say to clarify that there are kind of a couple main types of AFib that you can have. One is called persistent, where you're like always in that, irregular heartbeat, which tends to be pretty fast for people. So that's one, that you're always in it and you don't get out of it yourself without some sort of medical intervention. There might be some medication that helps get you out of it, or they might do, I can't remember what the exact name is, a cardioversion. That's what it's called. It's cardioversion, where they shock your heart back into rhythm. The other type that's pretty common is called paroxysmal AFib, and that's what I had. And that is where you'll go into AFib and anywhere from a couple hours to maybe a few days, you go back out of it again on your own. For me, generally, it was a few hours. There was a couple times it was like the next day before I went out of it, that type of thing. And there was only one time that they actually shocked my heart back into normal rhythm. And they did it the next day. So I don't know that, I can't say that I wouldn't have gone out of it myself. But anyway, that's the type of AFib that I had.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Brian. I can only imagine, the discomfort. Like, I think you mentioned 2 to 3 episodes per week. I think that sounds very complicated. How does that affect your, I guess, like your daily life back then, or maybe your work and your ability to exercise? I mean, did you have like any specific trigger, because you said you were like just sitting down and then, an episode would just like occur. Like, how did that affect your daily life?
Yeah, it was definitely pretty affecting. The first thing I would say is because I was put on a blood thinner, because when you go into AFib, blood can pool up at the one bottom part of your heart. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but that could cause a stroke. So they put you on a blood thinner so that blood doesn't really get stuck there, right? It's thinner and it, so you have less likely chance of having a stroke. So that was one of the biggest things, I think, was being on the blood thinner, because you are always worried about doing something to cut yourself open and bleeding out. So an example is that one time my family and I went to the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and we did a hike, and there was a part of the hike where it kind of went a little bit more off path and was more mountainous, like, more rocky and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable doing this, so I'm just going to sit here and wait for you all to do it and come back. And that was just because, it was a little bit more off the beaten path and so forth. And if I fell and cut myself, I might bleed out before medical personnel could get to me, right? And so that was how debilitating it was in that sense. Now, in another sense, another example I can give you is like one time I was out of town for work and I went into it that morning at the hotel before going into work. And I just ended up not going in that day and basically laying down in bed at the hotel, trying to relax and get myself out of it. It seemed like most of the time, if I laid down, relaxed, that kind of stuff, I would get out of it quicker than if I was actually trying to do something. Plus, if you're doing things normally, your heart rate kind of goes up. So you can imagine if you already have a very elevated heart rate from AFib, you have the chance of your heart rate going up even more when you're doing things. So you don't want your heart rate to go up too much. So that's another concern that can happen. So that's an example of how it would affect me. Also, like with work, like there were times I'd have to just not work or whatever. Or if it happened at work, maybe I would go home at that point, leave work for the day and that kind of stuff. So there was definitely those kinds of things that would happen. Now, in terms of making myself go into it, I guess is the way to say it, right? There were a few things that I could do that it seemed like if I did those things, I would go into AFib. Most of the time, I would say there was nothing in particular that I did. I would just be sitting there and it would just happen, right? But I did notice if I was lifting weights and it was really heavy weights, I would typically, within the first 5 to 10 minutes, I'd go into AFib. And then, of course, I'd stop doing that because, heart's racing and that kind of stuff, and you're trying to work out. So that would happen. Now, I would say if I was just doing, like, let's say, exercise bike or something not very strenuous, that would not happen. And my cardiologist even said that some people that go into AFib can do those types of things and it helps them to get out of it. So there were actually times when I was in AFib that I'd go on an exercise bike and just kind of pedal slowly and see if that would help me get out of it. It didn't really seem to work for me, but that is something that does work for some people. But going back to the whole lifting heavy weights, that did seem to trigger it. That was one thing that I could do other than just sitting there, right? That would trigger it. So when I first started doing carnivore and noticed that I wasn't having episodes anymore, I was very, very reluctant to do any heavy weightlifting right away, because I was like, if I do this, I'm going to get myself back into AFib again. And I haven't been in AFib, so that's been great. So I'd say it was probably a month or two on carnivore that I hadn't had an episode before I finally said, you know what, I got to try this and see what will happen. And I found that I was able to lift heavy weights and not go into AFib. And that's when I really knew that it made a big difference, because the first time I went to my cardiologist after doing carnivore and not going into episodes, this was like maybe 3 months in, the cardiologist was like, well, there are times that you can go a while without going into AFib. He's like, you could go like a year or something without going to AFib. And that just happens sometimes. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you change your diet and you're starting to lose weight that it has anything to do with that. And I was like, okay, it's just weird though. At the same time that I start doing this, like the AFib stops happening, right? And then, at like a year and a half, because I was seeing him like every 6 months, he's like, it is kind of weird that you're not going at AFib. So he started doing different tests. I had a heart monitor one time for 30 days. And it was like about 2 years into carnivore. He was like, yeah, everything is showing up good. I don't understand how just by changing your diet that you would just stop having AFib, but you don't seem to be at risk anymore. So we're going to take you off the medication. So, that's how it worked for me. I've heard from different people that have said that they've also seen great results from doing the carnivore diet and AFib that they had before. And then I've heard from people that say that, they've been trying it and so far it hasn't worked. So I think it's probably one of those things that it's kind of more individual to the person. Maybe depends on how bad your AFib is, that type of thing. If it's the persistent or if it's the paroxysmal AFib, I don't know. But for me, just a couple weeks going into carnivore was all it took. And it's been over 4 years now.
Yeah, that's very interesting interaction with your doctor about the the whole, it's not just because of the diet, and it's been 4 years
Yeah.
now, and then I think that was like 2 years ago, right? So that's very interesting. Um, did you had any assumptions before carnivore, like what was causing it? I know you mentioned about the sitting down, lifting weights. That could be the trigger, but did you think it could be something else related, maybe like stress or genetics? I mean, the daily stress in life, right? Like with me, I had psoriasis. I'm thinking maybe I'm just dirty and I need to take shower, or maybe I'm overdoing the shower. Lots of assumption. Like, did you had like many of those, or maybe just some?
Yeah. So my dad has AFib. So there is that hereditary effect, right? And that was the thing. My cardiologist, with the first time I had it, I'm trying to remember. I guess I was 45 or 44, something like that, years old. And he's like, "You're actually pretty young for AFib, but we're starting to see that more and more that people younger are getting AFib." And he said, "It's pretty much a hereditary thing. Your father had it. You're going to have it. That's just the way it is." Um, when I was doing research for the carnivore diet and I saw Dr. Camberry's videos, he had a video talking actually about AFib once. And he talked about, I believe it's the vagus nerve, and how that is one of the most common reasons for AFib. The too much insulin, too much sugar, right, kind of messes with that vagus nerve and it causes the signals to get messed up. So I was kind of hopeful going in that it would help me and maybe I wouldn't have as many episodes, that type of thing, right? If I stopped eating sugary food, stopped eating carbohydrates, that kind of thing. And I was hopeful. I will say I did keto for 3 months, and for me, I didn't see any difference at all. Like, I was still having just as many episodes, but my version of keto still had some carbohydrates in it, and probably that could have been causing a problem. I don't know. Or maybe it just took a while to get going, but it just seemed like very quickly with carnivore, it went away. Um, but so I kind of went in thinking that, yeah, I would probably see a difference. I didn't think it would go away. And that was what was really shocking and surprising to me, is that it just went away altogether and I haven't had an episode. And even at 4 years, I still have that thought and that worry that sometime, somehow, I'm going to go back into it. Maybe I'm going to eat food that I shouldn't eat or something, and it's going to trigger me to go back into it. But so far, it's been 4 years and it hasn't happened. So
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. How long did you do your research for before jumping into carnivore? I know you mentioned early on like Canberry, and then trying out carnivore for 3 months, and then gradually having this positive effects. Were you even skeptical of carnivore in the beginning? Like, did you, it took me a while to like wrap my head around it, but eventually, it's like, all right, let's just do it. How about you? Yeah.
yeah, I would say I did probably a couple of months worth of research. And, you know, probably the first thought I had is the same thought that most people have, that that's crazy. Like, everybody knows that if you're eating all that saturated fat and so forth, that's bad for you, that you shouldn't do that, right? That was the first thought I had. And as I kept doing research, I was just kind of finding that, man, maybe that's not true. Maybe we've been wrong all along, because as I do the research, it just common sense wise, it made a lot of sense to me. Everything that people were saying, things that I was reading just made sense. And, you know, you can look at a different type of health thing out there and talk to different doctors, and they have different opinions. So the fact that some doctors were saying carnivore was good and some was bad wasn't necessarily something that scared me, just because no doctor ever seems to have the same opinion about any type of medical thing, right? And it wasn't just Dr. Ken Berry. I would started watching Dr. Sean Baker, Professor Bart Kay, and then some regular people. Dave Mack was one of the first ones that I really started to watch. I forget what it's called. No Carb Life is his channel. And he actually started just probably a couple of months before I started doing the carnivore diet. So I just started watching his channel. And, you know, I was like, I know this sounds crazy. They say that this isn't good, but I'm going to give this a try. I'm really at that point where I felt like if I didn't do something, you know, I wouldn't necessarily live to a certain age. What that age was, I didn't know. But one thing I looked at, and something that keeps me going really with it all along here, even today, is for me, I want to watch my kids. Well, the thing I always said was watch my kids grow up, get married, have kids of their own, be a grandfather, be able to get on the floor and play with my grandkids, grow older with my wife, get, you know, retire and get to go on vacations and stuff like that with my wife, and not be in like pain. Like you see a lot of older people that they can barely move and that kind of stuff. Right. So that's kind of been really like my why I do this. And, when I looked at things back then and I said that that's what I want, I said, I don't know that I'm going to see that. I don't know that I'm going to see my kids have kids of their own, get married, that kind of stuff, because I wasn't sure how much longer I was going to live. I just felt like I was not very healthy. And I knew the AFib was not a good thing. You know, it brought on the more likelihood of a stroke, that kind of thing. I had high blood pressure since I was like 28 years old. So, you know, that's how I felt. And I was like, I need to do something. I know this sounds crazy, but for some reason, everything I'm reading makes sense to me. It seems like this is the right way to go. So I'm going to do it. And when you think about that, that's where it gets interesting, because as in my case, I have family, and especially like my wife, for instance, as I'm doing it, she's like, you know, you are your own person. You can make your decisions. I just don't think that it's the right thing. I don't think you should be doing that. I think, you know, you might give yourself a heart attack, that kind of thing. All the things that, you know, people say that you hear, I was kind of hearing it. And then after like 3 or 4 months where I had lost so much weight and I had energy and so forth, she was like, well, it seems to be working for you, but I'm still not sure that it's a good idea long-term, that kind of stuff. Well, now it's funny because where we're at now at 4 years, I will say something or somebody will say something, let's say, and she will actually say, well, you know, so-and-so, something that she learned from me about, you know, the bad thing with sugar or something like that. And she hasn't tried doing carnivore, but she tries to limit how much carbohydrates she eats. So more low carb, that type of thing. Stay away from the sugar as much as possible. So it's interesting how it's hard to just tell people and get them to believe you, but when they see the results over time, they start to change their mind as well. And I think that's what makes our channels, like your channel and so forth, so important, is that people see all of these changes that happen. You know, they see the changes that you've had. They see the people that you have come on, like me in this case, and talk about my experience. And over time, that starts to make an effect on people, and they start thinking, maybe we've had it wrong all along, and this actually is the way to eat. Because, I mean, when you think about it, and I know I'm kind of going on here, but this will be the last thing I'll say, then I'll let you ask me any more questions. But when you think about it, it doesn't make sense that all this processed food that we make that's not real, that's got all these different ingredients. You know, you look at some foods, they get the ingredients list is like this long on the package, right? Why would we think that that is healthier for us than some real natural food that came from a cow or whatever, it came from a bison or whatever, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really like the reason why you're doing this because of your wife, kids, family, basically, and the whole translating the message for the people that are non-carnivore. Because I feel like we all struggle to do that, and yeah, I think it triggers me like when people give me some reason that oh, it's probably just because you cut out processed food. I'm thinking, that's not it. It's more than that. Yeah. But Brian, what motivates you now? Like, is it helping people, or is it because you're feeling good? Do you feel like you have a sense of duty to spread, to make people aware about this? Are you frustrated with the current medical health guidelines and the nutrition? Because I know you mentioned that uh, there's a big possibility that we've had this all wrong, and that we've been hoodwinked or misled this whole time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of all that factors into it. I think what people have to come to the realization of is that companies out there aren't really that caring about your health. You have to care about your own health. What companies really care about is their bottom line, because if they aren't making a profit, they don't exist very long. And it is so easy for them to make a profit on manufacturing processed foods and so forth. And it doesn't matter to them as a company that, I'm not going to give any names of any companies, but a company, let's say, that makes something that's a very highly processed food that a lot of people buy. It doesn't matter really to them if it's not the healthiest food in the world, because their food is making them money as a company. And if that company did not make money, they would have to go out of business. And then if they went out of business, those people working there would lose those jobs and they'd have to find other jobs. So it's not necessarily that people want to think badly, the people that work at certain companies. And there are some people that eventually they like, you know what, I can't do this because I know like our food just isn't good. You see that every once in a while, right? They'll say like, I know we do this to try and attract people to buy our foods and so forth. And people end up leaving those companies. But, we're wired that part of what we have to do to survive is to make money. And so we have to have jobs. And it's okay that if my job just happens to be to work at a company that has a particular health food or a particular food that's not necessarily healthy, but we label it as healthy and people buy it and we're making money, that's okay because I'm getting the money I need and so forth. And then we all have gotten to this point now compared to what it was 30 or 40 years ago that we just accept everything, right? Like as technology advances, we look for easier way to do things, right? And one of the things with your health is that it's so easy if you can buy this processed food and warm it up in your microwave and boom, it's done. Instead of making this whole meal from scratch, cooking, whatever it is, cooking a steak or burgers or whatever it is, chicken, whatever, right? Like that takes work, and people are busy. It's not the same as it was 50 years ago, where most cases the wife stayed at home. They had kids or not. She stayed at home and did the housework. If you had kids, she took care of the kids, that kind of stuff. And then, we got to where we're at now, where in most cases, both the husband and the wife have to work just to making a living. And they're busy, and they come home and they don't want to spend an hour making dinner. They want to be able to have it ready in 5 minutes. So we do that. And we just don't think that could possibly be ruining our health, because that's how everybody does. That's what everybody does, right? So that's how we look at it. And that is probably, I think, the worst part about it. And I think that in my case, it can get frustrating trying to explain that I think that that's the case, and that we really need to think more about our health, and eating whole foods is better, especially if it's ruminant meat, that kind of stuff. It can get frustrating because you feel like it falls on deaf ears for a lot of people, right? But what always keeps me going, and kind of getting back now to like what you were asking, is when you get that comment from somebody that says, you know what, I saw your video, whatever it was, and saw how you fixed AFib, let's just say, and I have AFib too. I started doing the carnivore diet, like how you've been talking about doing, and I'm noticing a difference already. So you get something like that. Or you give, somebody that says, I am so glad I found your channel, because I started doing what you do in terms of your eating, and I feel so much better now. I have so much more energy, whatever it is, you get those, and it just makes up for it. And like, it only takes one person watching a video that you put out, and it makes you feel as if it was all worth it, right? It just takes one person that actually has a positive experience for your video. So that's kind of what I would say that I gravitate towards as big motivation. I still have the same motivation with my family, my kids. One of my kids just got married actually in May, and a second daughter is getting married in November. So some of that stuff is starting to happen now, and I am here to see it, right? And the one daughter did say that like they plan on starting a family and stuff. So some of that stuff that I've talked about to myself every day, remind myself that this is why I do what I do and so forth, is starting to happen. And that adds even more motivation to that piece for me, right? Because now I'm actually starting to realize some of the things are the reasons why I wanted to do this in the first place.
That's great to hear. Congratulations with your kids, the one who got married and the one about to get married. Wow. Brian, looking back at the start of your journey, the carnivore journey, were there any mistakes you made? What and how did you learn from them?
Yeah, there's definitely been mistakes. I would say one of the biggest mistakes is comparing yourself to what you see from others on YouTube. And I've been guilty of this at different times. Now, I've lost a good amount of weight, and, I don't have like the back pain anymore I used to have. I don't have joint pain, right? I don't have the A-Fib, stuff like that. Like I used to have arthritis in my big toes. I don't have any issues with my big toes anymore. So there's been a lot of good health things. But sometimes I would look at these videos from other people and I say, I just don't look like them. Like I still have I've been doing this for 4 years. I still have some belly fat. Now, I will say, gradually over 4 years, I have seen my belly fat go down more and more. And at times, I haven't really seen a difference in the scale, the weight on the scale, but I've still noticed changes like clothes fitting differently and so forth, right? So I will say that. But I look at some people and it's like they did carnivore for a year and they look completely thin. And that frustrates me sometimes. And that is one of the biggest mistakes I think that somebody can make. You know, don't compare yourself to others. There's different reasons why somebody else might work on a completely different track as you. They may not have been as unhealthy as you when they started and so forth, whatever. So that's one of the biggest things right there. I would also say that a big mistake probably that I made early on, and I probably still make sometimes, is that I think I get to points where I feel like it's okay to have something that I shouldn't because I've done so well, right? There's that thought process. Like some people will tell you, oh, I will do this like all week long. And then the weekend I might have a cheat meal or two and I feel okay, I'm fine. That's great. I'm not the type of person that could do that though. So occasionally I'll get to a point and I'll use this example. Was one time at Christmas, I think this was my second year of doing carnivore. I was like, I've been doing really good. There's these Christmas cookies here that my wife made. I'm going to have one. And I had one. And the problem for me is, I admit it, I'm a carbaholic. That's a problem. I had one and all of a sudden, oh, that really tasted good. I'm gonna have another one. So over the next couple of months, it kind of snowballed. And I actually gained 20 pounds at Christmas that second year. And at the end of Christmas time, like New Year's time, I was like, whoa, what am I doing? Like, I've gained weight. I've actually started to notice not necessarily any big issues, but a little bit of like, oh, I get up from sitting in a chair and I'm like, ooh, that kind of felt a little bit like I felt a little sore from that. And that hasn't happened to me in a couple years. So I noticed some things like that and I got back on track. Now, I will say, after gaining 20 pounds, it took me most of the year to lose that 20 pounds. So that was really bad. And that was a really bad example, very extreme example. But there's been some other examples where I've been doing really well. And I'll say, you know what, I'm going to eat this. And then that causes me to have cravings for the next week or something where I just want to eat that food. So that is the other example I would give of mistakes that I have made. And I know there are people out there that they can do that. They can eat the one meal and they'd be perfectly fine. But there's also a lot of people out there that are like me, a lot of people I've heard from that are like me, that if you eat something bad, you just get the cravings back. It can create that snowball effect like it did that one Christmas for me. So those are the two biggest mistakes I would say for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just gonna kick back the cravings from the start. What was your favorite food then? Because you talk about like, being carboholic and then you know bringing back this cravings. Do you have anything specific?
Um, there's a couple of things. I've always liked pizza. So I've always been into pizza, but not necessarily a really big sweets guy, but for some reason, icing, frosting, whatever, like that you'd put on a cake, that was always something that was really big for me. And I actually had a thing happen, I don't know, I think it was like a year ago or maybe 6 months ago, something like that, where my wife was out of town and she left an open can of frosting, or I think it was maybe just open and there was nothing out of it, or maybe it hadn't even been open. I can't remember, but she left it sitting on the counter. And I went most of the day saying, no, I'm not going to touch it. And then finally, eventually I took a swig out of it, like a spoonful. And I kid you not, over the next 24 hours, I ate the entire damn can of frosting. I had the worst back pain ever for like the next 2 to 3 days. So I really learned my lesson with that. But frosting was something that I used to really like to eat. Another thing that I really liked was the Reese's cups, the chocolate with the peanut butter inside them. I used to really like those. So, and Oreo cookies. So when I was heavy for most of my adult life, there was probably drinking soda was a big thing. I think I stopped drinking soda actually like before Carnivore. So like maybe 2020, somewhere in there. So I have not had any soda since then. But you know, when I was heavy, most of my adult life, it was because of drinking soda. I might get a thing of Oreo cookies in a couple days, have the entire package gone, Reese's, that kind of stuff, and pizza. Like I would eat pizza a lot. So.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, Oreo, yeah, it's pretty addicting. um, what do you eat now? Like, what does a typical day or week eating look like for you now? Do you pretty much keep it consistent, or maybe switch things up from time to time? Maybe you can walk me through.
Yeah. And with doing Carnivore for 4 years, it's kind of changed a little bit as I go. Like there have been periods of time where I was pretty much steak every single day. There's been times that I'll eat 2 meals a day, times that I do OMAD where I'm only eating 1 meal a day. Right now, it's mostly 1 meal a day, occasionally 2. And I had been doing some extended fasts of like 48 to 72 hour fasts, though I haven't done one in about 2 weeks, so I really need to do it again. But I was getting pretty regular there for a bit where I was doing usually a 72-hour fast every week. So that was kind of helping with the food prices as well, right? The groceries, because you're not eating for a couple of days. But what I've been really big on lately is ground beef. I'll make into burger patties. I'll cook them up, and occasionally steak, just because the ground beef is so much cheaper than the steak. So I've been doing that. I will eat eggs, not all the time, but I will have eggs sometimes here and there. I will have some chicken. Usually if it's chicken, it's normally going to be chicken wings or chicken thighs. So I'll buy them at the store and cook them up. Chicken thighs with the skin on them, so I get that extra fat. In terms of pork, I'll have bacon sometimes, not a whole lot. I really do like the taste of bacon, but I don't eat it a whole lot. So maybe once or twice a month I'll have bacon. I will say if I have bacon, I'm probably having at least half, if not the entire package of bacon. So at one time. So I do eat quite a bit of it if I do eat it, but I'll do that. Occasionally, so I am Polish, and then there is something called kielbasa that is Polish, and I actually make authentic kielbasa from scratch. So I know that there's not any bad ingredients really in it. So I will do that occasionally. Usually that's like around Christmas time and Easter time. That's so like twice a year that I'll have that stuff. And I'll do a pulled pork every once in a while. I just did a pulled pork that I smoked on our smoker like a week ago. So I'll do that every once in a while, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. And that's, for the most part, that's it. Well, I will have some seafood too. Salmon, I like to have salmon. I'll eat shrimp, that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much it. I would say probably if I looked at a given 10 meals, period of 10 days here, probably at least 8 or 9 of those are going to be beef, whether it's ground beef or steak. So the majority of it is probably that. Then there might be chicken of some sort or whatever. Or like I said, eggs I will have sometimes, bacon, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's predominantly probably beef. And again, it's normally OMAD. Sometimes I will eat a second meal in a day. And then the last couple of weeks, I've kind of gone away from it, but I try and do a 48 or a 72-hour fast. If I can, 72 hours is always best. And then I guess I should say, I also, for a while now, have been doing fermented foods with every bit of meat that I eat. So I know some people that they look at fermented foods and they say, okay, I will have some of them that are more carnivore based. So like kefir, aged cheeses, that kind of stuff, because it really kind of fits into carnivore. And other people are like, I'm not going to have like sauerkraut or anything like that because it comes from a vegetable, right? The good thing about the fermented food is that when it's fermented, all the plant toxins have been removed, and most, if not all, of the carbohydrate is removed from it as well. So while at first I was afraid to eat those things, I'm to the point that I'm not afraid to eat some of that stuff. So I do like sauerkraut and kimchi. I guess that's about it most of the time. I think I have had fermented beets before, which is kind of weird. But I should also explain that the reason that I do the fermented foods is for my gut, the biodiversity of your microbiome. And it's not like I'm sitting there and just eating a bunch of sauerkraut or something, for instance, right? So what I do is I will take every bite of meat with a little bit of fermented food and I chew it together. And I know some people look at me like I'm crazy, but I will say there is a pretty prominent political figure right now, RFK Jr., that has talked a lot about this. And he actually got this from the same doctor that I got this from, which is Dr. Sean O'Mara. And there's a lot of good research he's done that shows that this can be very helpful. I know it's very controversial. Some people in the carnivore space are like, no, that's crazy. It doesn't help. But how do we know that we're right about that? We could be wrong. We don't know, right? We believe in some cases that it doesn't help, and other people believe that it does help. So I do it. And yeah, it's just a little bit that I chew up with my meat, every bite pretty much that I eat. And I've been doing that pretty strongly here for probably at least a good 6 months or so. And it's funny because before I started doing that, the first time I actually started to do a little bit of that was a year ago, because I got sick. And I know it sounds crazy. Carnivores actually can get sick, even though I don't get sick very often. That was the last time I got sick, by the way, last summer. It's like June. And so it's been a little over a year. And I got sick, and they put me on an antibiotic. And when they did that, I started having all kinds of issues. I started actually getting a little bit of joint pain, which was interesting, like my fingers. And I had, what do I want to say here? I had my gut, I guess. The best way to put it is that I was starting to have issues with my gut, a little bit of issues with going to the bathroom, some pain, that kind of stuff. And I read up that this particular antibiotic that they put me on causes issues like that. So I stopped taking the antibiotic after like 3 days of going through this. And I said, okay, what can I do to improve my gut? So the first thing I did was I heard about this good culture cottage cheese, which is pretty good for you. Not too bad of ingredients. And it had the live and active cultures for the fermented in it. So I started eating a little bit of that and kind of went to like eating some kefir and stuff like that. So off and on, I kind of did that. Nothing big, but I did that. And I was watching Dr. Sean O'Mara videos and seeing like he would show the MRI scans of people and their visceral fat. And so then about 6 months ago, I started doing this more strictly. And I was kind of like, you know what? at this point, my gut's feeling pretty good. It seems crazy to me that this does anything, but I'm going to give it a try. Because I did know, first of all, like I said, one of my things was that I'd watch other videos from other people and I'm gonna be like, they look so much thinner than I do. I still need to lose, body fat. I'm sure there's visceral fat. So I said that I was going to do it. And what I noticed with doing it regularly is that my gut actually started feeling so much better. And I actually like I felt really happy and stuff like after eating and stuff like that. And I'm like, how does that happen? But the other piece of it is, to my point, is that before you start doing that, if you're on carnivore, you might think like, I'm good. I don't need that. That's a waste. I'm, my gut feels great, but then you don't realize how much better your gut could actually feel. And that's kind of where I'm at now. And that's why I do it. Again, it's not a lot. It's just a little bit that gets mixed in with it. And sometimes I think people hear me talk about it and they get confused and think like he's eating a bunch of sauerkraut or something like that. And it's not that case. It's just a little bit. Like people say sometimes, oh, there is still carbohydrate in what you're eating. If you're eating a bunch of that, you're adding up your carbohydrates. And it's like, okay, there actually is some carbohydrate in eggs and steak too, but we're not going to go there. But the point being, it's such a small amount that I take. It might be like 1/4 of a serving of something. So when you read that there's one carbohydrate in a serving, it's 1/4 of that I might be getting in that meal with what I'm mixing in with my meat. So it's not as much as people think, but I do that. And I've been doing that pretty consistently for at least 6 months here, and it's gone really well.
Wow. Brian, this is very cool. And, I find it very interesting because I did spoke to a couple of carnivores who also include like fermented foods in, into their whole thing. And I'm really glad that it's working for you. I think might be a good idea, doing this because of, like you said, like the diversity of microbiome in your gut. I think, yeah, that's an awesome thing. I might actually also try to do this in the future. So, yeah. Brian,
It
is
took
there
me like
anything
3
hard
years.
about
I was carnivore for
3
3 years and
years?
never did anything with fermented foods. So, it you you kind of, things can change as you go, and it doesn't mean that you're not carnivore anymore or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. It took me 3 years before I did it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, because I hear this a lot also that we're all very different. Like, I think you highlighted earlier that uh, we shouldn't copy or we shouldn't like look at another individual who has a different approach to the lifestyle, right? And then their body is probably very different to how my body operates. Yeah. Brian, is there anything hard about being carnivore for you? Like, for me, has been the social gatherings who are with non-carnivore family, friends, relatives, and also the travel, the cravings in the beginning. Took me like over a year to get it out of my system. I think also, some mental thing, like I'm seeing all these benefits, but I'm also seeing the people around me who I think, really going to benefit if they do carnivore. Yeah. Something like that. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, like benefit for us, but then you see people around you like struggling. What about for you? Is there anything hard about being carnivore?
Yeah, there is. I mean, one thing that's good for me though is that I've always liked eating meat. So it's funny, like I used to say, so you're telling me I can just eat steak all the time and that's okay? Like that's what you do with carnivore? I'm like, wow, sign me up, because like I love steak, right? So that's been a good thing for me. Like I haven't had to deal with, like some people say, where they get like meat aversion and they don't really want to eat meat. That has never happened to me. But like you, I did have cravings for a pretty long time. And I still, if I eat something I shouldn't, it'll bring back cravings. If I eat something or drink something, like let's say, you ever hear those ice drinks, those flavored sparkling drinks? If I drink one of those, I know it says it doesn't have sugar, but it's got some kind of fake sugar in it or something. That'll make me crave to eat sweet foods or carbs. So I have to be careful and not do that kind of stuff. So there are pieces that are hard for me in that sense. Luckily, anytime we've gone to like gatherings, people know I'm carnivore and they've been very accommodating. Like I remember one time, I think it was last summer, we went to someone's house that they had a party, and the guy's like, I made extra meat just for you because I know that's all you eat is meat. And he's like, see, we got all this here. So he's like, you can have as much meat as you want or whatever. So I've been lucky and run into a lot of those situations. But I will say also, on the other side of the coin, one thing that's hard is going out to eat to a restaurant. Before Carnivore, that was one of the big things that my wife and I did, is like we go on like a date night or something and go out to a restaurant. And it's really hard to go to a restaurant and find clean food, even if it is like steak. They might cook it in something that's not great, and you might think like that shouldn't really affect you, but it can. Like sometimes after I've eaten at a restaurant and it's just been like steak or something, I start to get a little bit of a craving, and it's because of what they cooked it in or something, or seasoning they put on it or whatever, right? So that kind of gets hard. It's like we like to go out to eat. We don't go out to eat as much as we used to. And it, as time's gone on, it's been less and less. But that is really hard, is figuring out where to go, what to eat, and then if something just doesn't go right for me, dealing with the cravings for the next couple of days that gave me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, the restaurant part too. Uh, Brian, if you had to describe the impact of carnivore in your life, what one word would you describe it, and tell me why?
One word. Wow. Uh, I would say unbelievable, because if I would have looked at the changes that I've had, how much better I feel and so forth before Carnivore, I would not have believed that just by changing your eating habits that can happen. I would not have believed that. It's been life-changing, and that's another word I could have used, but it's just unbelievable. But like I talked about the AFib, that probably, just because of what AFib, how serious it can be, that is probably the biggest thing about being on Carnivore for me, is that I have not had to worry about AFib, not have to be on the medication, worrying about bleeding out, that kind of stuff. That's completely unbelievable to me, because I hoped that it would get better. I thought that was something I'd have for the rest of my life, that I'd have to worry about. I didn't think that I'd be where I am today with it. So I'm going to go with that it's unbelievable. And that's why, because like, I could not imagine, like, people could tell me that this is going to happen, and I wouldn't have believed it, that it would be this good.
I like that word. Yeah. Knowing what you know now about the carnivore, the nutrition, right, and maybe other things also, if you can give an advice to someone who may have a similar issue like you with a AFib or maybe a chronic pain, and they see how much success you've had with this lifestyle, like but at the same time, they're very skeptical. They have no clue, and it's very hard to translate the message to them. What would you tell them now?
That's a tough one, because I really feel like most people are not going to really stick with something unless they feel like they've hit rock bottom. So that's a really tough one. I guess the message would be, if you think it's too extreme, ease yourself there, which you should ease yourself into changing your diet anyway. You don't want to make an extreme change because you can really mess with your gut and so forth doing that. So you should, I always say you should go to carnivore over like a 4 to 6 week period or so. I think Professor Bart K usually says like 6 to 8 weeks, something like that, right? So I would say try and ease yourself into it. First thing you need to do is get rid of processed foods as much as possible. Get rid of foods that are really high in sugar. Drink. You got to get away from soda. Even these so-called sugar-free sodas, they got fake sugars in them. There's all kinds of names out there that are used in the place of sugar, and it's basically sugar. It may not be exactly sugar, but it still breaks down as glucose in your body. So, do those things. Try and get rid of some of those things. And if you start to notice a difference, you start to notice maybe less joint pain, stuff like that, then it's working. And just realize that everybody's different. It might take you weeks, months, even years to feel the way that somebody gets within a few weeks. That's just the way it is. Everybody is different. And I do think that the stricter you are, the quicker things will change. So if you're easing into it, it's going to take some time. But that's how I'd probably approach it. Ease into it. And in terms of meat, do what you can. Like, there's a lot of people out there that'll say like you should have grass fed and stuff like that. And I don't think that there's any denying that grass fed is probably better for you than grain. But even grain fed beef is so much healthier for you than highly processed food. If that's what you can afford, do it. And you're going to feel so much better. You're going to improve yourself so much. I still do a lot of grain fed beef. Like, I will buy grass fed when it's on sale and there's really good deals. Otherwise, I'm pretty much doing grain fed. And I get, the difference with omega-3, omega-6s and stuff like that. And just in general, the grass fed is going to be a little bit better for you, a little bit healthier, but that doesn't mean that you can't do that. Same thing, like some people, Dr. Berry talks about this, like, they'll eat it like a lot of bacon and hot dogs and stuff like that. And other people say like, you can't do that stuff. If you're eating that stuff, it's still a lot better than eating some highly processed frozen dinner that has 30 or 40 ingredients and you can't even pronounce 28 of them because the names are so weird, right? It's still so much better. So that's, I guess, the advice that I would give.
Yeah, I find that a really great advice. I think I like what you said, like easing into it, and then 6 to 8 weeks. I find this all like very good. Brian, what about for those? Because you've been carnivore for 4 years. What about for carnivore for a year and up, right? What if they've been having success with carnivore, but like a year later, they're seeing maybe some decline, or maybe they're having a oxalate dumping and they don't know it, or maybe low in electrolytes and also they don't know it. Maybe they're having some issues. What would you advise them? Should they just like stick with the carnivore, or maybe try a different approach? Maybe there's something else, like, with the way they're approaching the carnivore, that is missing. Maybe this is too a little bit more complicated also. But yeah.
Yeah. I think it depends on what's happening for them. Like for oxalates, I will say, based on some research I've done, maybe adding some fermented foods could help with that, because your gut can make a big difference with oxalates in particular. It's interesting because there are definitely people that can be doing a year or two of carnivore and all of a sudden have an incident of oxalate dumping. And they're like, I haven't ate oxalates in a year or two. And that's just part of how the body works. So that's an interesting thing. If it's something to do with your weight, that would be a different type of advice story. And this can kind of go from my own experience, because at a year, I had lost like 80, 85 pounds. And it really slowed after a year. And some people get frustrated by that. Like I talked about how I'd look at other YouTubers and I'd be like, why am I not as thin as them? I'd look at it and I'd be like, yeah, I've lost a lot of weight here. I've lost like 85 pounds, but I still have weight to lose, and I'm not losing weight on the scale anymore. And my advice in that situation that I had to kind of learn and go through is, don't just look at the scale. You should be looking at things like your measurements, measure your waist, your belly button, stuff like that. Measure your legs, your upper thighs, your lower legs, your biceps, your neck, your chest. Do all kinds of measurements and keep track of those measurements. Sometimes you see changes there, but you don't see changes in the scale. And some of that also, it makes a lot of sense if you've been doing carnivore for like a year, is because your body's getting healthier and you're gaining muscle at the same time. And, if you're losing some of that body fat and you're gaining some muscle, the weight on the scale is not going to change, but you're going to see the changes in measurements. You're going to see the changes in your face. So make sure you've taken pictures of yourself and look at the changes in your face. If I look at where I was a year after carnivore to where I am right now at 4 years, the physical changes in a picture from one to the other, you see a big difference. But in terms of weight on the scale, it's only been like 10 pounds or something like that. It's not a big difference. And at the same time, I think I've had like 2 or 3 inches on my waist go down in that time period. So there's been, half an inch every once in a while that has dropped. So maybe it's not as fast as some people see, but it's what I see. It's been my experience. Every experience is different. Some people are going to be like that. When you have a lot of weight to lose, it's going to be a lot easier to lose that weight than when you don't have as much. I think fasting can help. I did not do any fasting early on, other than just your intermittent fast, where I might go OMAD and you go 24 hours in between meals. And early on, when you're losing a lot of weight, you're getting by fine without that. But there's a lot of good benefits to fasting if you do a 48, 72 hour, or even 96 hour or something fast. And there's a lot of good benefits as well for getting rid of some of that stubborn belly fat, body fat, and, visceral fat and stuff like that. And I think that's something that you can incorporate as well if you're noticing that you're not seeing differences. And again, you might not see a whole lot on the scale because different people are different. And I haven't seen a whole lot. I've seen a little bit more recently here, especially with fasting more consistently. But just don't be upset if the scale's not changing. Make sure you're checking all those other things. And the other piece that I didn't say, other than like your measurements and stuff, is how do you feel? Because you might not be seeing a difference on the scale, but you might feel 10 times better than you did 3 months ago. And that's a difference too. That shows that carnivore is still working for you, even though you're not seeing it on the scale.
Ryan, this is very well said. I feel like I really like your approach to this, especially for those carnivores for a while. Yeah. Um, Brian, my last question for you is your future outlook. How do you see carnivore in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see it be on the good side or maybe in the bad light? Bad light meaning, we'll see meat prices going high, or maybe it'll skyrocket. Media pushback, big pharma or so. And then the good could be more people talking about it. More people want to hear about the specific diseases, like what we're hearing now. Basically, more podcasts talking about this, and maybe in the media too. What are your thoughts?
Mm. Yeah, I think RFK Jr. has opened some people's eyes to the carnivore diet. He's made some changes in the US with the food pyramid and stuff like that I think is good. But I also think that it's not going to be a very mainstream thing over the general public. And the reason being that people have been brainwashed essentially into thinking a certain way for so long that it's hard to get past that. Maybe more longer term, we can get past that. But in a shorter 5 to 10 year period, I don't think we get past that. And also, you got to look at the pharmaceutical companies, the companies out there that are making food and so forth. And they are definitely going to fight this, just like any diet out there, they would fight. You've got food out there that's really not good for you, that's labeled as heart healthy or lowers cholesterol. Lowering your cholesterol is not necessarily a good thing. That's debatable, I understand, but in the carnivore community, I think a lot of people would both, be able to tell you that, yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing. But, you have that. And the other piece of it is that people are kind of hardwired to wanting to do what's the easy thing. And businesses know that. Look at what the biggest thing is right now. It is a GLP-1 drug. Just about everybody I know at this point is doing that. I'm like, gosh, I'm like the only person that's not doing it. But, there's a lot of people. And there are people that are actually doing carnivore that are doing it as well. And they're seeing some success. So I don't want to just put down the GLP-1 thing. But it is really an easy way for people to lose weight. They're not necessarily getting healthy because, I think there's pretty good evidence of losing muscle, losing bone density, that kind of stuff with it. So you have to be very careful. You have to be somebody that works out, I think, to try and keep that going. You got to make sure you're eating a lot of protein, even though it's very hard to eat when you're taking that drug. But the fact of the matter is it's the easy way out. And people are having success with it, with losing weight. When people say they want to lose weight, they really want to be healthy, but we associate just losing weight with that, right? So there are so many different ways you can lose weight. I lost weight back in 2017. Like I said, I lost over 100 pounds, but it doesn't mean I was healthy with doing it. I couldn't sustain it. I still was in pain all the time because I still had inflammation in my body. It wasn't fixing those types of things, right? And I think that there can be benefits with GLP-1, but it can also be a problem. And it's just the easy way out. And they're going to really push that really hard. Instead of having you eat the carnivore diet and so forth, companies are going to tell you it's okay to continue to eat my processed food that I created and am making money on, because you can take this GLP-1 drug, which, oh, by the way, costs money, and that pharmaceutical is now making money as well. But you can take that. And even what's the biggest thing about that is most people that stop taking that drug, they gain the weight back, sometimes more than what they had. So you have to take that drug kind of for the rest of your life. They just created a customer for the rest of their life, for the rest of that person's life. So they are making money. And that's why I think those types of examples are why it's going to be really, really hard to make carnivore a very widely accepted thing, at least in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, we could get to a point later down the road that it just makes sense. We have more people in a youth movement that are really looking at it, that type of thing. And over time, that helps, right? But in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think we're going to see much of a change from what we have today. And this could kind of really be like the top ceiling for us, because we have political leaders within the United States that are really pushing it to an extent. They're not necessarily saying, hey, you got to be carnivore, but they're talking a lot about eating real food, not processed foods, stuff like that. And you also have other countries that are banning things like, fake meat, for instance. So we might be at the premium time right now, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to get better in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's probably not what people that are doing carnivore wants to hear. But that's why it's important to have that grassroots effort with all the YouTube channels that are out there that are talking about this and try and help as many people that you can get. Unfortunately, there's going to be people that just aren't going to listen, and you're going to be mostly hitting people that are at that rock bottom and ready to listen and try different things. But that's okay. If you only help one person, you did better than the day before, right? So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything you said. I think a couple of things I wanted to highlight was that there's many ways to lose weight, and you talk about like in the past you lost 100 pounds, but the inflammation didn't go away. I think it was the same thing for me. Lost a lot of weight, but yeah, specific inflammation did not go away. But yeah, I think so many things. I agree. Brian, if people want to reach out or connect with you, where's the best place to reach you?
So probably either YouTube or Facebook. So on YouTube, I have channel. It's known as Wick Goes Carnivore, which the channel name is actually at Wickivore. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from long form videos right now, and I don't know when I might come back to doing those, but I'm going to try and do some short videos, which hasn't really been my thing. But I've been doing the YouTube thing for over 3 years, like 3.5 years now. And I'm kind of a little bit burned out, and I'm having trouble coming up with topics that I haven't already talked about 1,000 times. Right. So, and I have a lot going on. Like, I just had my one daughter get married, another daughter's getting married in the fall. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with work. So I've kind of felt like I'm stepping back for now on doing long form video. But a short video, I don't have to do like a lot of editing to it or anything. I can just capture something on my phone and upload it. So I think I'm going to do some shorts for a while. So that's a good way that people can see me, is through my videos there. My email address is available too off of my YouTube profile, so you can look at it that way. And then I'm also available on Facebook. My name is Brian Nowicki, and you probably see from my face what I look like if you see a profile on YouTube or in Facebook. And I do try and do a lot of, motivating people about eating healthy, stopping processed foods, that kind of stuff on Facebook. So I do a lot of that kind of communication. And that's another way people can reach out to me. They can message me on Facebook. So
Brian, this is excellent. Yeah, I checked out your channel. It's really great content you have, especially those long form videos. So I'm looking forward to seeing those short videos that you're going to make. I'll make sure to post them all in the description so people can reach out to you. Brian, thank you so much again for joining me. Really enjoyed hearing your story and your perspective about carnivore. Appreciate you taking the time to share. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Joseph.